Homes were once the simplest measure of progress, a sign that stability was possible, a place to anchor a family, a way to convert your hard work into something permanent. For decades, owning a home wasn't some far-off dream. It was the default outcome of a middle-class life. But today, in advanced economies all across the world, that logic has been turned upside down. Homes became expensive, rent became unstable, ownership became a distant goal, and stability, the very thing housing once guaranteed, became fragile. This isn't a story about politics or ideology. It's a story about structure, about economics, incentives, land, capital, and the slow mathematics that outpaced an entire generation. This is why homes became unaffordable. There was a time when the price of a home moved in rhythm with the income of the people who lived nearby. When wages rose, home prices rose modestly. When wages slowed, home prices slowed down too. The system wasn't perfect, but it was balanced. A house might cost 2 or 3 times your annual income. A mortgage was manageable. Rent took up a predictable slice of your paycheck. People didn't talk about housing crises. Housing just was. Then something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, the way most fundamental systems shift. The first shift was structural. Income just stopped rising at the same pace as everything else. For more than 30 years, wages across advanced economies pretty much moved sideways, while the cost of living just accelerated. Food went up. Energy went up. Healthcare, education, all of it increased. And housing, it didn't just increase, it detached. It detached from wages. It detached from local economies. Detached from the very people who needed it most. A home was no longer a reflection of your income. It became a reflection of something else entirely. The second shift began quietly, almost invisibly. Homes stopped being just shelter. They became financial products. For decades, a house was a place to live, a place to grow old, a place to measure the passing of time. Then, the financialization of housing completely rewired the system. Land became an appreciating asset. Homes became investment vehicles. Rental units became commodities. Mortgages were bundled up into packaged debt instruments. Global capital started pouring into local markets. Investors began buying properties not to live in them, but simply to hold them. Housing stopped responding to local wages and started responding to global capital flows. And capital moves a lot faster than families ever can. The third shift came from scarcity, an absolute scarcity, but a structural one. For decades, the pace of new construction slowed down. Not because the world ran out of land, but because the rules changed faster than the needs of the population. Regulations increased the cost of building. Zoning laws restricted the supply of multi-unit housing. The permitting process slowed to a crawl. The idea of density remained politically unpopular, and infrastructure just didn't expand as fast as demand. The result was predictable. Demand grew, but supply didn't. Scarcity became policy, even when nobody intended for it to. The fourth shift came from demographics. As populations expanded, the shape of households changed. We saw more single-person households, delayed marriages, and longer life expectancies. There was more multi-generational overlap. We ended up with fewer people per home, but a greater need for more homes overall. Now, the structure of demand multiplied. The structure of supply didn't. More people needed homes, but fewer homes were being built. The math was simply inevitable. Then came the fifth shift, the cost structure itself. Even when new homes were built, they were built differently. The price of raw materials rose. Labor shortages pushed construction wages higher. Energy costs, financing costs, insurance costs, they all went up, and land prices surged. Every single input moved upward, and when every input becomes more expensive, the final output can only move in one direction. The price of a new home no longer reflected the cost of living. It reflected the cost of building. The sixth shift came from competition, between families, but between families and capital. When interest rates fell, mortgages became cheaper. That meant buyers could borrow more, but it also meant investors could borrow more. Institutional funds could borrow more. Cheap money amplified demand. It amplified speculation, amplified bidding wars. So, who was competing? You had a first-time buyer with limited savings going up against an investor with leverage, speed, and massive scale. The outcome was never a mystery. Homes went to the highest bidder. And the highest bidders were rarely the people who actually planned to live in them. The seventh shift came from our own expectations. People used to buy homes to live in them. Now, many buy homes simply because they believe prices will keep rising. They buy not for shelter, but for appreciation. Housing transformed from a utility into a strategy. A home became a hedge against inflation. A property became a store of value. Ownership became speculation. And renting became a state of dependence. Mobility became constrained. When enough people expect prices to rise, prices do rise even if nothing fundamental has changed. The expectation itself becomes the mechanism. The eighth shift emerged from debt. Mortgages expanded in length. Loan-to-value ratios increased. Households started borrowing more and more relative to their income. Payments stretched across decades instead of years. Essentially, debt substituted for wage growth. In a healthy system, your income buys you a home. In our current system, debt buys you a home. The distinction is enormous, because debt is not wealth. Debt is a claim on your future work. And when an entire generation has to mortgage its future just to afford its present, you know the system has already shifted. The ninth shift came from mobility. In past decades, people generally lived near where they worked. Today, many live where they can afford to. Distance became the price of survival. Long commutes replaced proximity. Time replaced money. Stability was traded for convenience. The geography of opportunity stretched hand with it. The geography of affordability. Then there's the 10th shift. Maintenance. This is the hidden cost that no one escapes. Owning a home once came with predictable repairs. A new roof every 20 or 30 years. Appliances that lasted a decade. Materials that could survive for generations. Today, maintenance reflects a very different system. Materials degrade faster. Components are harder to repair. Skilled labor is more expensive. Insurance premiums keep rising. Replacement parts cost a fortune. A home is no longer a stable asset. It's an ongoing financial obligation. The 11th shift came from rent. Rent used to move slowly, predictably, pretty much in line with wages. Today, rent moves independently. It responds to scarcity, to investor strategy, to inflation, to interest rates, and to construction deficits. When rent rises faster than your income, households lose their mobility. They lose their savings. They lose their resilience. And that resilience was once the defining feature of the middle class. The 12th and final shift came from the simplest force of all. Time housing crises aren't born in a single year. They accumulate over decades. A housing shortage here, a new regulation there. A shift in demand. A slow, steady rise in land values. A normalized expectation that prices will always go up. A culture that sees a home as an asset first and shelter second. Each one of these small forces is survivable on its own, but together they are structural. This leads us to a quiet truth. Homes didn't suddenly become unaffordable. They gradually became misaligned with the economy that was built around them. The cost of living increased. The cost of building increased. The cost of borrowing increased. The cost of land increased. The cost of scarcity increased. The only thing that did increase at the same pace was the income needed to sustain it all. For many households, this is what unaffordability feels like. You save, you budget. You wait, you run the numbers again and again, you sacrifice. And the math still doesn't work. It's not because you failed, it's because the system shifted faster than you could possibly adapt. Unaffordability isn't a personal outcome, it's a structural one. The question isn't how we got to this point. The mathematics are clear. The real question is what happens to a society where the very foundation-stable housing moves out of reach for the people who sustain it. Because a home isn't just a building, it is the center of economic life. And when that center moves, everything built around it moves too. Homes didn't become unaffordable because one thing changed. They became unaffordable because everything changed. Income slowed, costs accelerated. Debt expanded. Capital moved faster than families. Scarcity multiplied. Expectations shifted. Supply fell behind demand. And the economics of shelter became the economics of assets. This isn't a story of a single crisis. It's a story of designs, low, cumulative, and structural. And the real question is the one that remains. What happens next? When the most basic building block of stability no longer belongs to the people it was built for. Thanks for watching.